We are continuing in section number 131, the triumphal entry. The triumphal entry, we got the first couple of questions answered before we paused, and we'll finish up this section for sure today. One of the things I would like to remind us of from the last time is this nature of Hosanna, okay, when they were shouting Hosanna. The thing I wanted to make sure to emphasize from the last time was that this was not just one of those church words, not one of those spiritual, religious terms that are out there that people say. It was more to them. It really had to be more to them because this was the capstone. This was the ultimate part of the set of praise hymns that were done every year. In fact, several times a year they were done. They always ended with Psalm 118, in which the Hosanna, the King coming in, the entry of the King. They knew it was a messianic psalm. According to the interpreters, the commentators at that time. So when they were saying Hosanna and they were applying it to Jesus, they were making a very grand admission. They were making a very grand admission. So that was one of the things you want to recognize right away from the study from last time. Now, another idea that's closely associated with the idea of Hosanna is in having the King come in. They had a very strong messianic understanding, which means that they had a very strong millennial understanding. Mille meaning 1,000, millennium is 1,000 years. And so when we look at the millennium, what's described as the millennium in the book of the Revelation, that's where we get the millennium from, that it's 1,000 years. For the Jewish understanding, they just knew that it was that reign of the Messiah that was going to take place. And so they were like right in lockstep with us about this millennial kingdom that was coming in. So they were looking for that, and this idea of the millennial reign runs in extreme opposite conflict with world government. It is antithetical. For your thesis, it's like your doctoral thesis, your argument, your main idea. Antithetical meaning it is directly in opposition to the world, to the sense of world government. This is one of the big deals that we are facing today, and I try to get these teachings in a little bit of time here and there all over the place, and we're going to look at that again in just a moment, the next question. But the millennial kingdom versus secular government is a major theological concern as well as a major social concern for us today. Brother Joe, yes.
Yeah, just in line with what you're saying, something I hadn't really thought of before, but just until recently, that when Jesus entered on the foal of an ass, that was very significant to the Roman government, because the Roman government would have been watching this and saying, okay, what's going on here?
Oh, yeah.
And had Jesus ridden in on a white horse, they would have seen this as an insurrection and somebody looking to dethrone the yoke of Rome. So this was not just something, I mean, of course it was prophesied and, Jesus did this, but I think in the political context, of the time, this was very important because, Rome would have just said, he's riding in on it, this doesn't mean anything. This is just some religious ceremony or something, as opposed to trying to undermine or overthrow the government itself.
Yeah, exactly, yes. Okay, clash of governments, clash of worlds, clash of kingdoms. Brother Tone, yes.
The angel that heralded Jesus' birth said that he came for peace. Therefore, the symbol of peace is an ass.
Yeah.
And I think the Pharisees also knew this, but they're using their human wisdom and self-preservation because they want to keep their positions. And if Jesus, the Messiah, would really be recognized as the Messiah, they will be out of their place. Would that be a logical thought, Pastor?
Yes, I believe so. I believe so. Something that let me read this next question. We're going to get into this further. Let me do it in the context of the question. Question 720, where did the people expect salvation to come from? And we're going to look at Mark 11:10. It says, "Blessed be the kingdom of our father David, that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." So the answer that you should have gotten was A, in the highest, or from heaven. Okay, so here we have a very distinct, a very clear statement about the conflict between the two kingdoms, the kingdom of heaven versus the kingdom of man, the kingdom of earth. And we see that conflict down to this day. In fact, does anybody happen to remember where this conflict of kingdoms is most clearly first mentioned in the Bible?
Is it Isaiah?
No, hundreds of years before, 6,000 years before. No, 5,000 years before. Go ahead.
Say in Genesis chapter 3.
No, not as a kingdom of man. You would say that. I could see where you say that. You see the Satan's influence. Genesis chapter 8, the Tower of Babel. Okay, that's where you had the first establishment of. In fact, it was right after the flood that you had God establishing the institution of government, of human government. God gave government because government is there to deal with men who will not deal with God. You're going to obey somebody. You're going to either obey the government or you're going to obey God. And if you want good government, you should have God's influence on that government. And in that vein, you have the world. They're a little bit nervous about Christians because man in his rebellion, man in his resistance to God, is afraid that Christians are going to tell everybody how they have to live. Well, yes, we are. But beside that, apart from that little fact, it's how and why is the issue. Okay, we are not looking as Christians to overtake government or to take over government, in other words. We are here to invite people into our kingdom. We don't want government taking over our kingdom, but neither do we want to take over the kingdom on earth. Okay? They're supposed to work side by side. Each one has its purpose. Now, you have in theology the, begins with an R. All I can think of was renovation. No, restoration. The restoration theology, which suggests that only Christians should be in charge of government, and you should only have Christian presidents and Christian congressmen. I tell you, if we had that, we'd still get no closer because they're still men and women, and they're still going to be subject to their lusts and things like that. You're not going to get perfection if you have Christians take over. Christian Reconstruction and the Restoration Movement. Yeah, it's actually called Christian Reconstructionism and also known as Restoration. Okay, so we're not interested in taking over human government. We want to be able to bring our values into our votes and into directing the laws, but we don't want a pope. Now, this is a very historical Baptist position. And it's not just Baptist, it's other positions also of any of the independent churches. Where you have independent churches, historically they did not want to take over government. They didn't want to have the church rule the world. I'm having just a great time, and I'll probably allude to it for a while since I'm reading through Thomas Armitage's History of the Baptists, and I'm in a section where they've been talking for about 4 or 5 centuries in the chapters there in the book about how the church and state became intermixed, and all through that time you had those who resisted that hierarchy and that system. So we are now down to this day, and this is one of the reasons why I like our Baptist heritage, why I don't feel any concern about taking away the name Baptist. I think it's a fine name to utilize because there's a whole rich heritage of that. Baptists in America at the time of the Revolutionary War were in a position they had been invited to become a state church. I had read that Thomas Jefferson said amongst the Baptists he had seen no purer form of democracy than in Baptist churches. But the Baptists very wisely said, no thank you. No thank you. We don't want that kind of power. Because as long as you got humanity involved, power really does corrupt. And absolute power really does corrupt absolutely. And so we are still faced with this today, where we've got these two kingdoms in conflict, where we have government from on high that we want to bring people into on the way out of this world versus man's government. Now, man's government is fine. Here's what happens next in the development as man gets a hold of something, is that man wants to have it be secular. And so there is a push for perfectly secular government. Secular meaning no God whatsoever. No holidays celebrated. You can't have Christmas for the postal workers to take off. You can't do any of these things. They want absolutely secular. They want to, in fact, you see it in the push to in using dates. They don't like to say Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. They want to say BCE and CE, and that's before the common era and in the common era. Doesn't make sense because they still mark it from the time of the birth of Christ. Either way, it's
I was going to say that's the same time period.
same timetable, yeah. And so, in fact, before that, they used, in the time of the Roman Empire, I can't remember how the time was calculated. The Jews, they talk about it from the beginning of the world. And so they have a time frame that recognizes a 6,000-year history of the world, and a young earth creation. And so you've got this conflict going on. So when you look at B, were the Jews expecting salvation to come from earth, from the government? No, they knew not to look for an earthly benefit. They knew that their hope was not in human government. In fact, the whole nation that government without God and is only secular is what's going to play into the hands of the Antichrist. So now, if you want to, in the time of the political season, and you want to try to understand how to be a good citizen, this is what you want to look for. You're looking for critical elements, the elements that make a seminal difference in your thinking. Seminal meaning a seed, at the very seed level, from the very foundation, where we grow and where we go with our concerns for government. Okay, man will be governed, but what role government plays is the critical thought. What role government plays. So here it is. It's summed down into one sentence, two distinct differences. Government can either be a provider or a protector. Government is either a provider or a protector. If government exists to provide for our benefit, we got trouble. Okay? If government exists to provide for our benefit, then it replaces God. The only way that government can be fair, if the purpose of government is to be a provider, is to give you Marxism, is to give you communism. Because if you say fair, if government's to provide, let's say somebody said, well, it's kind of like if you had kids. Let me see. You get your kids there, and you have to, if you get for one kid, what do you have to do? You have to get for the other kid. The same thing. And of course, you get around that by saying, well, you're different in ages, so no, you don't get to have the motorcycle, you have to have the bicycle. And for that matter, you don't get to have the motorcycle either. Okay? So what you do for one kid, you have to do that would be fair. You know how my father made sure to establish that? He said to me, he would say to the one who had to cut the cake, you cut the cake for you and your brother, and your brother gets the first choice. Okay, so I'm going to try to make sure to shave that thing down the exact middle. Okay, so if that's what government is there to do, is to provide the cake, to provide the benefit, it's going to have to split it evenly. Communism. Okay, does it matter whether your brother did a better work than you? Does it matter that you were stronger than your brother and you did more than him? No. If you wanted to be fair, you had to split it and you had to give each one equally. Now that's if government is, if the role of government, the function of government is to be a provider. Now, if on the other hand, government is only there to be a protector of our rights, then that means that we'll get what's right for us. And government will protect it. So that if Joe works harder, Joe gets the bigger piece of cake. Okay? And it is Annie-approved cake. Okay? So you see, now I would be protecting his rights. His rights, where he did more work, he gets the bigger piece of cake to go with it. Let me just carry on for just a moment here. And so when you take God out of the mix of what's fair and what's right, as far as, as people getting what's right and protecting our rights, then you end up with government that's only going to be fair. When we say, I had an extra thought in here, government being protector of our rights. It'll probably come back to me as I talk a little bit. Let me go ahead and let you interject there, Joe, and hopefully what I was going to say will come back a little bit better. Oh, yeah, I remember what it was. Yeah, in fact, let me go on for just a moment. Okay, so government protecting what's right. Where does the sense of right even come from? We allude to this regularly. This is a thing that comes up in many discussions. How do you determine what's right? You can only do that if you have God. Mm-hmm. That's the only way you can have things be right or good or moral. Without that, there is no such thing. I referred to it this morning when I said, what's good for me, if you base it on what's mutually good, well, yeah, just as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, good is in the heart of the beholder too. And you will have different societies, different cultures on earth who will have basically kind of the same morality, because that does come from God, conscience does from God, but you can find in competing cultures that they have a little different sense of what's polite and what's good and what's good behavior. Okay, so what's good does not depend on what feels good to people. That is hedonism. That was Epicureanism, which was centered on self and what was good for me. That's what people are living by. So you have multiple codes. So in other words, if what is good to me is that we each keep our hands in our own pocketbooks, but if what's good to Joe is to put his hand in my pocket, you've lost the whole definition of good. If what he thinks is good, and if Tone thinks that he should get both of what's in our pockets, okay, if each one of us is right, then the word good means nothing. It's all relative. If I said that this is Bluebities, and if I said this is Bluebities, and I said this is Bluebities, could you tell what Bluebities even means? They're totally different. Okay. Yeah, so if Bluebities can be applied to everything, then it's relativism. It means nothing. It's a nonsense word. Same thing with word good. If what Joe thinks is good, if what Tone thinks is good, and what if I think is good, if they're all three different things, and we all use the same word to describe it, then the word good means nothing. So only Christians, or religious people for that matter, only those who are theistically minded, because we can say that for any religion, anything that looks for God as the author of what is right and what is moral and what is just and what is good, then that only makes sense. You take that out of the equation, and which secular government wants to do, then it's all a question of who's in power. It's no longer a question of what's good or what's right. And so the Jews, they recognized that government must come from God. They were not looking to human government. They didn't want the power of Rome over them. And when they wanted Jewish government, they wanted to have essentially God's government. So if the role of government is to protect our rights, at least we have a fighting chance of doing good. Because though we might not get everybody to agree with us, at least we can get some people to agree and go along with God. So if the role of government is to protect our rights, then there's at least a chance to live a life before God alongside of others who live according to their conscience. Go ahead, Brother Joe, and then I'll finish up with C.
The one thing I wanted to say was that's why we have our, not only in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution,
Right.
Time and again, reference is made to God, because we are endowed with certain unalienable rights, and that's
Yes.
not where it ends, that's where it begins.
Right.
So, and the other thing to realize is that we are a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. As I've heard it said, democracy is two wolves and a lamb deciding what they're going to have for dinner.
Two wolves on stuff they're going to have for dinner. That's good.
And that really is the way it works out, is if the majority rules only without any respect to the minority, that is not what the constitutional, our Constitution is designed to protect people from government. Actually, that was the founding fathers' greatest fear, was that government was going to get too much control, which is why they put in the system of checks and balances. Now, of course, that's been corrupted and abused, but the theory was sound. In other words, that they knew that government was going to be a problem, and that people didn't need the government. The people needed more protection from the government than the government could afford to the people.
Yeah, and which is, again, protecting rights, having the checks and balances.
Exactly.
In fact, the role of the role of the legislature, or the Constitution, was to stop government from abusing us.
Exactly, to stop dictatorship and to stop any of the. That's why there's the three branches to balance each other out. And as Ben Franklin aptly said, they asked him, "Well, what kind of government did you guys decide?" And he said, "A constitutional republic, if you can keep it."
Yeah. Yeah. Now this is all important, because you see, when it's not just what was presented, the kingdom of heaven from the highest. It's what's not mentioned that is also important. It's the kingdom of heaven as opposed to what? As opposed to every other kind of system. When you get to the next political season and it's time to vote, do not stop thinking at what's presented in the media. Okay, this candidate or that candidate. I was always told it's not a beauty contest. When you go to vote, it's not a beauty contest. Don't look how the candidates are presented. As citizens, what we do is we think in terms of what system are we supporting? Are we supporting government taking more and more power and replacing God? Or are we looking for government to just protect us and our rights to create the world that we want? Okay, so because we're not going to, until the millennial kingdom comes, we're not going to have perfection. When Jesus comes, then it's going to all be perfect. So I try to get these kind of teachings in because the media is going to make what it wants. Personalities, look at the system, not just the policies, look at the systems that are being endorsed. Brother Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to say more and more government is looking to take away rights, but
Right.
they're out of their domain, because God is the one who gives us the rights. Government is only supposed to be instituted, as you said, to make sure that our rights are protected. They're not the one. They can't take away what they didn't give us to begin with.
Right. Yeah.
But that's how they're trying to function now.
Yeah. And in fact, you'll notice if you listen carefully to what's going on in all the news sources, there's a question of rights, individual rights versus government being able to control. And that's where all the hubbub is in the world today. Okay, so the Jews, okay, first let me look at C. Did they expect their salvation to come from Israel, from an army? Well, today, Israel has long ago learned that there's no protection they can assume from any government. Have you ever noticed the Jews, if they're going to attack something, they're going to do it no matter what requests are made, no matter what pressure is put on them. they've learned they can't depend on other governments. But they shouldn't be depending on their strength either. They could make the mistake, though, that their strength comes from their steadfast will to survive by willing to not tolerate any compromise with the rest of the world. So they could make that mistake. Well, they weren't in that position. They were not looking for a secular government. They were not looking for an army of their own. They recognized it was coming from the highest, and so they were millennial-minded. What should we be? We should be millennial-minded. We should be looking to get people into the millennium. Does anybody know how long, how many people know what the Third Reich was? What was the Third Reich? Okay, the Third Reich was Hitler's government. Okay, that was what it's called. Why the third? Why the Third Reich? Okay, because the Reich means rule. He was thinking, he was presenting the opportunity for a new millennium. Okay, you had there were strong religious tones. Hitler used some of the religious concepts in trying to set up his Third Reich. We know how that ended. Okay, yeah.
That's why the Antichrist is like that. He will present himself as
Yes.
the false Christ.
The Antichrist will present himself as the false Christ.
The false Christ, pretending to be
Right, I'm repeating it because you don't have the microphone. The false Christ pretending what he is not, the true Christ, in the millennial kingdom. In the place of, yeah. Which is what anti here means, in the place of. Okay. Very good. So question 721. Well, how did the Pharisees react? And this is going to be based on Luke 19:39. Some of the Pharisees from among the multitude said unto him, Master, rebuke thy disciples. So how did they react? A, they thought the people's praise was inappropriate. Okay, so let's look at A, B, and C all together. They were beginning to be persuaded that Jesus deserved such praise, or they wanted Jesus to do more miracles to prove that he deserved the praise. Well, for some people, it never matters what proof you offer, in contrast to C. They don't care. They'll just keep moving the goalposts. They were neither coming close to or being persuaded, as in B. They were not getting there at any rate. Nor were they interested in further proof from Christ. They recognized what the people were doing for what it was. It was worship. It was a runaway train, they could tell. Since they had rejected him in their hearts, they thought any praise that Jesus was undeserved, as in A. Okay, question 722. What was Jesus' response to the Pharisees? Luke 19:40. And he answered and said unto them, I tell you that if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. Okay, so the answer is C. He pointed out that the praise was in such demand that it could not be contained, and it had to come out one way or another. One way or another. Okay, A, he agreed that the masses were overly excited and becoming fanatical. Well, this is a reference to the way people love the fantastic and they love joining a bandwagon. Okay, he did not say this, but that's something that could have been a problem. He was not just leading the band on the bandwagon there. Okay, for B, he believed that people should have had a more somber sense of holiness. Well, that's the opposite of A. Okay, B refers to how there are others who are very dour and think that religion should be very austere, very sober, very serious. For C, Jesus pointed out the natural expression of faith and how it comes forth on its own. Especially in this case, of course, because it is Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. There's going to be no holding it back. No holding it back. I like to preach a sermon about how the stones did cry out. Ultimately, they did cry out. I like to make the association with when Christ was hanging on the cross and the earth shook. Okay, the stones did end up crying out. There was no holding it back, and then the veil of the temple was rent. Psalm 19, verses 1 to 6 says, The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There was no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of the heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. The glory of God is another one of those pervasive themes in the Scriptures. You see it all over the place. To expect anything less than the rocks crying out is unfathomable. It had to be at least that. Yes. That was Psalm 19, verses 1 to 6. Okay, question 723. Why did Jesus weep over the city when he came to it? This is Luke 19, verses 41 to 44. When he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it, saying, If thou hadst known, even thou at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the day shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. And they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Of course, this is not the only time that Jesus wept over the city. So, why did Jesus weep over the city when he came to it? It is B. He cried tears of sorrow because of the judgment they were bringing on themselves there in their missed opportunity, which is the time of their visitation, was a missed opportunity. When you look at C, he cried tears of joy because they were finally going to get a king to deliver them. Well, even though Jesus was going to present himself as a king, there was no cause for rejoicing here, not yet, because the people were still at a point where they could exercise their will to reject him, as is going to be seen later on in Matthew 23. There's going to come a time when Jesus will impose his reign on the earth, but at this time, his acceptance or rejection was dependent on them. And so just because they were cheering him on, he knew what was coming. He knew the rejection that they still could hold in reserve. For A, he cried tears of anger, okay, because they wouldn't do things his way. Well, Jesus would have been justified with tears of anger, but not because he was some petulant child who was not getting his own way. His concern for Israel, and his concern was for Israel and what they were about to miss. So for the answer is B. Well, judgment is something that must be impartial. He knew he was going to have to judge them. Just because he felt aggrieved for them didn't mean he could escape his role as judge. It's as though Jesus was saying, you were so close and yet so far. Okay, brings to mind the statement, two ships passing in the night. Does anybody know what famous, I think it's given as a poem. Yes. Evangeline. Okay, so look up Evangeline, the story of Evangeline. It's a story of I don't know if they were married. They might have been married. They got separated as the French Canadians were being evicted from French Canada, and they were put on separate ships, and they were so close yet so far. There were two ships passing in the night. So Evangeline. Okay, let me see. Yeah, they were so close yet so far. Even though the judgment has to come to pass, God still feels compassion on those who have to receive the judgment. Any questions before we go any further? We're moving a little bit steadily. Any thoughts? Okay, question 724. What was the greatest reason the people flocked to Jesus in Jerusalem? And he comes from John 12, 17 and 18. And by the way, you should notice in the harmony that each of the gospel writers, they have different stuff going on there that each one records. The people, therefore, that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and raised him from the dead bear record. For this cause, the people also met him, for that they heard that he had done this miracle. So the answer is C, his resurrection of Lazarus. For his healing or for his wisdom? Well, people could have had a self-interest in how Jesus could have benefited them by looking for healing, as in verse number 18. As in A, but verse number 18 says explicitly it was because they were in awe of the resurrection of Lazarus. Okay, for his wisdom, well, they would have done better to trust Christ for the divine wisdom. when he displayed the miraculous to them, or then when he displayed the miraculous. C, the greatest reason to believe in Christ would be the resurrection. They did not realize they were about to observe an even greater resurrection than that of Lazarus. Something even bigger was coming. It's like you think that was great. This is the hors d'oeuvres. The main course is coming. This is the appetizer. Okay. Question 725. What impression did the Pharisees have of the triumphal entry? It's going to be based on verse number 19, John 12:19. The Pharisees therefore said among themselves, "Perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him." So the answer is B. They were afraid Jesus was unstoppable. And they were right. Okay. Well, they knew that it wasn't going to fade away. And that's something that we see a lot of times. We get worked up over stuff. We've got to make sure to get worked up over the right things. No. We want how energized we get to be proportional to the importance of the things that we are worked up over. We don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. Many times, things that seem so major actually will just fade away. How many people remember Occupy Wall Street? Where did that go? Yeah, that was going to change everything. Or how about Chaz? What was Chaz? The autonomous zone over in Portland, the autonomous zone. Okay, that fell out of vogue, sort of. They're still trying to keep that alive somehow. Look up climate change doomsday predictions that failed. You would not believe the bunches of them. Everything, every time they tell you climate change, the world should have been flooded 100 times already. Okay? Where did all those predictions go? How many people remember Cindy Sheehan? Who was Cindy Sheehan? Whatever happened to her? Well, she was very popular in the media when George Bush was running for president because she was her son had been killed in Iraq, and so she was a protester about that. Well, they loved Cindy Sheehan. George Bush went away. They didn't need Cindy Sheehan anymore, did they? Now, I wanted to try to get a lot more examples. I just couldn't think of them all because they all faded away. But this happens all the time. When people are political pawns that they're not needed anymore, out they go from the media. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in the 70s, the big fear was the next ice age.
Yes.
Because the last 40 years have been cooling. So that was the big thing. And a lot of people don't believe me when I tell them that, because there was no internet at the time and, there was not all this instant communication as we have like today. As soon as somebody comes up with an idea, it can go viral in a matter of minutes. But at that time, all the big magazines, Newsweek and World Report, Time and Life and whatever other big magazines were around, they were all the cover stories were proclaiming that the next ice age was coming.
Yeah.
So they just look at the weather patterns and then they just build their doomsday machines based on that.
Yeah. Does anybody know what augury is? Augury is predicting the future by looking at the patterns of bird flights. Yeah. So same thing with climate change.
And some of the other things that you may not mention, but I remember that I think in 1970, somebody predicted that there would be a mass starvation in the world because of the food supply wasn't going to keep up with the world's population increase, and there would be like literally either millions or billions of people were going to die from starvation. I think it was probably billions of people were going to die from starvation because just they crunched whatever data that I guess was convenient to make that model, just like they do with the climate change. Actually, they ignore a lot of things because they don't have. They can only put in the things that they know are going to happen. They can't put in all the other variables like the El Niños and the La Niñas. They can't do that because they can't predict those. And then, of course, the models are going to predict what they want because they're the ones putting the data in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, and make no mistake about it, it's not gone away. I mean, I guess they must feel cheated because what they're trying to do away with is industrial farming. If you ever listen in the news, if you ever hear a reference to industrial farming and the problems of industrial farming, Well, it was by industrial farming that we're able to keep up with the food supply. That's one of the reasons we're able to keep up with it. And although they want to bring an end to that, I guess so they can finally get their starvation for the world. Yeah.
Not that long ago, it was save the trees, use plastic.
Right.
Now, they don't want us to use plastic.
Going back to paper, yes. Going back to paper. Something had come back to my memory, and I was asking Nancy. I was trying to get this in my mind, and it came back to me. There was a clergyman scientist by the name of Malthus, and he was back in the 1800s, and he was dealing with population growth. And I cannot repeat enough of it to make it make sense, but I know this, that because of the views of population growth, you had people like Jonathan Swift, who wrote A Modest Proposal, and Charles Dickens, when he was writing the Christmas Carol, they were in response to this whole issue of population growth and starvation and things like that, and the models that were presented because they were objecting to the way things were being redefined in the laws there. When you hear Charles Dickens put in the words of Scrooge, "Are there no prisons? Okay, are there no union workhouses?" He was not just being Scrooge and being miserly. He was actually Dickens was making a commentary on that whole mentality in his day. A Modest Proposal was written by Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift was also known for writing a little tale called Gulliver's Travels. How many people remember Gulliver's Travels? Okay, it was very big political commentary that he was making when he wrote that. That was not just a fine little film there. A fantasy film, but when he wrote A Modest Proposal, it was about dealing with the quote-unquote the Irish problem, okay, and what he proposed was having the children of the Irish being raised up as a food source for the rich English aristocrats. Well, so. Now, he didn't really mean that. Again, that's why you know it's a satire. He was making a commentary on the same thing. So this whole thing about population growth and food supplies and climate change, nothing new. You go back to Charles Dickens, and it's not just a story about an old miserly guy. It was a big social commentary being made at the same time. That's much on the order of what we're facing today. Yeah, Brother Joe.
We had Soylent Green in the 70s.
Soylent Green. How many people know of Soylent Green? Okay, Soylent Green is people. Okay, yeah, Soylent Brown, yeah, Soylent Green, Soylent Orange maybe, I can't remember. Food sources for the masses there. Okay, very good. Yeah, nothing new under the sun. Well, okay, C, they realize that if you can't beat the people in their reaction, you should just join them. If you can't beat them, join them. Might be a popular saying. In my opinion, that is not likely in real life. Okay, people don't generally think that, not generally. However, in politics, they do. That's not real life. Okay, politics is not real life. The whole idea, what happened, and this is history now, how the Democrat Party was formed was because of various factions who were not powerful enough to get what they wanted. So what they basically did was they joined forces in government, and they would each vote for each other's causes, even if they were the opposite. And we're seeing that problem today on the left. Does anybody happen to know where it is most acutely seen in politics today? On what issue? Transgenderism. Okay, with you have the feminists who are trying to get away from traditional sexual role models and roles. Okay, but now, they wanted to have special recognition, which was very appropriate. But now you have men trying to take over that position. But you're not allowed to say anything because, oh no, you're not allowed to say anything against homosexuality and about perversion. So now you've got this conflict going on, and you've got girls who are missing out on possible scholarships they could have in sports because they have men coming in saying they're women and making all the records. That women will never, ever, ever, they will never, ever be able to beat those records. And so men are taking over. But you see, this is where politics makes strange bedfellows, is an understatement. Okay? So if you can't beat them, join them? Yeah. No. The Pharisees, they were at least smart enough to know that they couldn't do that. They were in opposition and that they had to try to stop Jesus if they were going to do anything. I saw a hand getting raised out there. Somebody? Okay. Okay. They knew this was not even a possibility because they knew that Jesus would not. I think they had enough sense to know that Jesus would not want to work with them. There was going to be no compromise. So the Pharisees correctly perceived that Jesus was an unstoppable train, and there was no way they're going to miss the tide of popular opinion. Sometimes things get too big, and there is really no turning against it. Okay, last question, 726. What understanding did the disciples of Christ have about the triumphal entry? This is based on John 12:16. These things understood not his disciples at the first. But when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. So the answer is A, they had no understanding of the significance of the triumphal entry until after the resurrection. So for C, they understood Jesus was offering Israel the opportunity to receive him as a king. Well, it was possible for them to have had that understanding that the rest of the people had about presenting himself as king. But John explicitly, if it weren't for the fact that John explicitly says that they did not understand it. So they could have had the understanding, but they didn't. And the only way we know that is because John said so. Okay, so for B, they understood that Jesus was there to offer himself as a sacrifice for sin. Well, they might have easily missed the coming crucifixion because the people were so excited about his visit to Jerusalem. Even though Jesus had been telling them about it, okay, when you see all the people hearkening to him, this could have looked just like many other times when the crowds were thronging Christ. In the face of such acceptance, any rejection, let alone such ultimate rejection, would have seemed implausible. When we consider modern day elections, when there can be such excitement, only to have all hopes dashed the morning after an election. Same kind of thing can happen. I tell people, when they ask me my opinion, do you think so-and-so is going to win? I've been wrong so many times. And such disappointment. Well, the rejection of Christ was much more serious than that, of course. And so for A, many times we can see more clearly after something has come to pass. For the disciples, the triumphal entry was more clearly understood in the context of its fulfillment. When they saw it actually as part of the greater fulfillment of things, that's when they got it. Sometimes we wonder how different theological perspectives are arrived at. Part of what makes biblical and theological studies so interesting is to see how different doctrines came to be in their historical settings. Studying theology, studying church history is a study of theology, how different things develop, where it came from. This is one of the things I think that's interesting in the Sunday school class right about this time, as you're looking at baptism, you're looking at, well, when did these notions come in? How did they come in? How could they do such a thing? What were the pressures that brought in these false and funny notions, and how were they able to be popularized? You had all along in church history, when you got into the Middle Ages, into the Dark Ages, and the Middle Ages, you had a number of revivals and people rejecting the Roman and Universal Church, the Catholic Church, and they had great successes if it wasn't for the sword. And so what could have been great movements in their time, drawing multitudes away from Catholicism, because of the power of government, they were put down. This is one of the reasons why America really was great, or has been great, because you ended the religious persecutions. it's interesting to note that under that system of freedom, where rights of the individual were protected, people were free to follow their conscience before God, Baptist churches grew like crazy in America. And really, you see some of the non-denominational churches today, they're really the fruit of that also, that kind of thinking, because they also are independent. And it's because of that sense of independence and being able to follow their conscience. So it's either Baptist churches or other churches also that are independent. That is where the vast part of Christianity is today. People look at, we look at Roman Catholicism here in our particular area, and we see all these cathedral-type buildings. It's interesting to me that they're being torn down here in Bayonne to make way for high-rises and things. That's an interesting discussion all by itself. But you go down south, and what do you see all over the place? Huge Baptist churches, okay? How many people have traveled in the South? Miss Bertha, you're from the South originally, correct? Are you from the South, but you have Southern connections? Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? You go down the South, you see you go down the road, big Baptist church. Go down the road, another big Baptist church. Okay, it's wonderful, it's beautiful. Okay, now don't go down there, don't move down there, just do the same thing here, I say, right? But you look at church history, how this stuff developed, and Baptists and then others like them make up the largest groups in America. It's just that you don't have a Baptist denomination, so they can't say, oh well, the Baptist Church has X million members in it. No, it's like all the different kinds of Baptists, and there's a bunch, have the greatest percentage of Christianity in it. Yeah, Brother Joe.
Yeah, a former colleague of mine when I used to work for the newspaper years ago, he was the kind of guy who would like to go hiking and, doing all those kinds of things. But he went somewhere down south. I don't recall where it was. It might have been in one of the Carolinas. And he goes, I was in God's country, both literally and figuratively. and he said there was one cross section where there was a Baptist church on each of the four corners.
Oh, amen.
And he was just like, whoa. He said, and he asked me, why is that? And I said, well, I can't really say, but they probably have some different, there's going to probably be some differences in the way they operate and what they might teach. But I just can't picture that here. I mean, that's more than we have in the whole city of Bayonne, and that's just one corner.
Yeah, I think when I was down I was traveling with my father doing a job down in Cordova, Alabama, and while I was there, I attended, I think it was Fourth Baptist Church. I think there were others after that too. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, when you look at theology, I mean, they were looking in the context of their moment there, and as you look at church history and the history of theology, that's what church history is a history of theology. You see how these things in the context of their day came about. I think one of the most recent things that we've been dealing with in our modern times now has been what's called the pre-wrath rapture, the idea, some notion that Jesus is going to come somewhere in the middle of the tribulation before the great wrath hits. And one of the things they'll say is, oh, well, the pre-tribulation rapture of the church is something that was not taught until John Darby in the I can't remember what year kind of thing. And my question is, so what you're telling me is that all before that, what was taught was your pre-wrath view? No. That was something that actually only came about in the last 50 years. We know the originator of that theory as well. You can find them on Wikipedia. But all before this, everybody anticipated the immediate return of Jesus Christ to come at any second. So this is the sense of looking at theology in history. Okay, let me ask if there's anything else anybody would like to throw in there. Brother Tone, yes.
The concept of two kingdoms, the worldly kingdom and the kingdom of heaven,
Yes.
Is actually recognized by people because when people of faith talk to leaders in the country, for example in Congress, to bring about some changes that concerns church interest, Christian interest, That's diplomacy. And Paul said we are supposed to be ambassadors for Christ because we don't belong here, we belong to heaven. So even if the world rejects the existence of kingdom of Christ, it's present, and every subject of his is ruled from the heart. There's no external trappings that people can see except by our behavior, of course, by which they can distinguish. That's why it's important that our behavior should be like uniforms,
Yes.
easily distinguishable. Now, the government thinks that this kingdom thinks that they originated it. Actually, it's ordained of God, Romans 13.
Right.
And it's really for protection and defense. God even ordained the creation of nations. He was the one who set boundaries. But many people, because they are rebellious, they reject these boundaries. And today, America is suffering the consequences of not having a protected border. We
Right.
cannot be a country without borders. And who are we to reject God's ordained boundary for nations? Now, that we read in one of our publications said that a founding father said that we can only be our system of government in America can work only if a majority of the citizens are Christians.
Right.
Because it operates not exactly on what appears in the world, but from what is dictated by the scriptures, and we follow that. And that's why we're trying to participate in elections aggressively, or we encourage Christians because we vote on policies that are being espoused by these parties, not on the idiosyncrasies of candidates, even if it irritates us sometimes. But if we really focus on this, for example, we must question every policy, because that's one of the failures of the framers of the Constitution, is that they did not seek to link in specific terms that the Declaration of Independence should influence the formulation of the Constitution. Although that really happened in the minds of the Founding Father, as written, the Constitution, except probably in the preamble, where there is an admission that God influences the affairs of men.
Yeah.
And so this rights, as Brother Joe was saying, is really important, because it's the one that would allow us to freely extend God's kingdom on earth.
Yeah. In fact, I think probably the most specific thought there is the aspect of us being ambassadors to the world, and it is by our diplomacy that this system of world government in America or in any country is influenced. Yeah, it depends on the generosity of people towards each other. Without that God-given inspiration of generosity and loving others and wanting the best for others, if you're reduced to merely loving self and doing what's best for yourself, and no government can survive that. No government can survive that. That is the essence of communism. Communism is built on covetousness, on everybody thinking that somebody else has it better than them. So yeah, without the Christian influence, such a republic as this could not exist. And then David Barton of the Wall Builders Foundation, if you go to wallbuilders.something or another, look up Wall Builders, and they make the case for how that, yeah, the Declaration of Independence was indeed intended to be one of the founding documents, and though some people, some secularists try to separate it out in order to have a more secular government. They really can't. It was, as you said, it was intended to be part of the Constitution.
Yeah. We had that session here, Pastor.
Yeah.
The Barton tapes.
Yes. We in fact we have the tapes here, and those same things are available easily online today as well. to be had.